Welcome everybody. Hello in Internet Land. Welcome to the first KiSSiT WiP or Work in Progress seminar that's going to be recorded. And this is essentially the first KiSSiT podcast, one of many I hope. And today what we're going to be talking about with two wonderful guests here. We have Dr. Varsha Panjwani, yes?
That's correct.
And Koel Chatterjee. Sorry, well, at least you won't get my Finnish name. I have to pronounce that. That's madness. So today's session is going to be Indian Shakespeare's on screen, identity, politics, and entertainment. So what we're going to do first is we're going to talk a bit about the project, because this big project is going to have its penultimate, one of the culmination points is going to be the upcoming conference, Indian Shakespeare's on screen. Which is on is the 27th to the 30th of April, with 2.5 days at Asia House in London, and then 1.5 day at the BFI at Southbank.
Okay. That's correct. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this is first I'll introduce so that all of our audience knows who you are. So, Dr. Varsha Panjwani lectures at Boston University in London and is an honorary research associate at CREMS. Do you call it CREMS?
Yeah, we just call it CREMS. It's the Centre for Renaissance and Early Modern Studies.
Yeah, at the University of York. And that's where you lived before you moved to London.
Yeah.
And you lectured there at the Department of Theatre, Film and Television 2009 to 2013? That's
right, yes.
So Varsha's research focuses on the way in which Shakespeare is deployed in the service of diversity films and theatre, as well as publishing widely in leading international journals such as Shakespeare's Survey and in forthcoming collections such as Shakespeare and Indian Cinema, the diverse part. She's won prestigious research grants from the Society of Theatre Research and the Folger Shakespeare Library. Varsha is an academic consultant for a number of theatre and film companies and is a regular reviewer for specialised journals and blogs. And our second guest, my colleague, Koel Chatterjee, is... why am I doing that? Chatterjee. Please say it again, Koel. Chatterjee. Okay, yeah. Thank you. She's a doctoral candidate at Royal Holloway, University of London. Her research focus is the adaptation of Shakespeare in Hindi film industry after Indian independence. Originally from Kolkata, India, she also is mapping connections between Bengali adaptations of Shakespeare and Bollywood remediation of his plays. She's a global Shakespeare editor at the Shakespeare Standard and a freelance writer for Shakespeare magazine. So welcome. First, the project of Indian Shakespeare's on screen. As far as I understood, could you talk a bit more about, just open up that word, because Indian Shakespeare's is not just Bollywood, is it? So there's many languages in India, not an Indian language as some people might presume, but so there's many cinemas as well.
Absolutely. Do you want to kind of address that, Cole, first?
Well, yes, you're right in saying that there's this new language called Indian. There are several Indian languages. There are several Indian industries, cinema industries. Bollywood is probably the biggest grosser in terms of by the 1930s, Bollywood was producing about 200 films a year. Now it's gone up to about 800 films a year. The next in line is Telugu cinema down south. There are a lot of different Indian Shakespeares, and the conference is one of the venues that we're trying to showcase that at.
Yeah, and even kind of, a smaller, newer cinemas are emerging. So, for example, I'm going to be talking about the independent cinema scene in India. So this conference really opens that up. We're wanting to go beyond Bollywood and addressing the entirety of Indian cinema and Shakespeare's contribution to it.
So where does Shakespeare come in? Because there's a rich tradition within Indian theatre going back to the 19th century. But how does Shakespeare come into the cinema and film industry there?
So Shakespeare was made compulsory as part of the Indian Education Act. Well, did I get that right?
Yes.
It was in the late 1800s when the British wanted to have a class of Indians who could speak like them, who could do the business of state with them. So, and Shakespeare became very fashionable at that time, at the turn of the century, then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where amateur performances were like part of the cultural scene. You had professional performances. There were theatres for the natives and theatres for the colonizers. It was quite a big thing. And that's also the time when film came to India. So obviously when people started experimenting with film, they started, taping performances of Shakespeare because that was the most fashionable thing happening then. So automatically what happened was all the different regions started to absorb Shakespeare, and through the kind of performance tradition and through the education system.
So yeah.
The interesting thing, however, is that Shakespeare was introduced to India as a means of undermining indigenous languages and indigenous art forms. But interestingly, as things, never work out as they want them to, and good for us, what happened was that instead of westernizing the natives through Shakespeare became indigenized. So that was kind of, a very interesting thing. And that is something that we'd probably be talking about, that, how Shakespeare has become Indianized rather than the other way around.
So where did this the idea for the Indian Shakespeare's on screen? Where did it come from? How did that develop?
My first memory of it is an absolutely lovely summer's day, where Taya Buckley, who's also working on this project, Dr. Preeti Taneja, again one of our collaborators on the project, Koil and I met for brunch. Yes, Sunday morning brunch. And we started talking about Shakespeare and Indian cinema, and we discovered that we were all excited about the way Shakespeare is being employed in Indian cinema for shaping identities, raising issues, and so on. But an argument broke out between us, and we started arguing about our favorite or the most significant and important Indian Shakespeare. And we realized that although we were bound together by this topic, we had absolutely different cinematic tastes. So this kind of, discussion after brunch, we thought, let's go for a coffee and continue it there, which then became dinner. Yeah. And by the time we were having dinner, we thought we do have a project on our hands.
But then technically the project started a long time ago. I mean, Shakespeare in Bollywood is my PhD subject. So, 2014 we had a very small, Preeti and I, Preeti was also doing her PhD at Royal Holloway in those days. So I kind of took the idea to Preeti that I would like to do like a one-day conference on Shakespeare in Bollywood. And people were very excited about it because they were like, is there a connection? So that was the starting point that we decided to do it. And we had a one-day conference, and Varsha was there. She also presented at that conference. And Poonam Trivedi was our keynote speaker. She'll also be speaking at this conference. She's starting off the conference this year as well. For me it started a long time ago, but I thought I was the only geek who was passionate about this subject, and it was really nice finding 3 other people who were equally kind of into, trying
passionate
to...
and argumentative about it.
So it really came out of this sort of a situation of friction in a way, which blossomed into this sort of a whole new project. But I'm sure if it started out that way, it must have been very. There must have been ups and downs, and I was wondering, what has been the? Has that tension been the most challenging part of the project, or presumably as a big project, just getting people flying them from all over the world, and is in itself a big challenge.
Well, for me, the biggest thing is because I always wanted it to be a collaborative thing, where I work with other people in the field. So for me, the biggest challenge was the funding issue, because firstly, institutions seem hesitant about funding projects that they have to share credit with another institution for. But more importantly, like when I went to Royal Holloway, the English department, when I went to the head of the department and asked for funding, they were like, because you're a PhD student, we don't have any system in place where we can offer a lot of funding for an individual project.
That's right.
They wanted someone who was a tenured professor, for example, like my supervisor, who could be the name for the project. And then they could give us a lot more money, but, and I found that a little odd because, my research also belongs to Royal Holloway, even if I'm not a tenured professor. Preeti, in fact, used to belong to Royal Holloway as well. I mean, her research was also in Shakespeare and King Lear in an Indian context. So it was a little strange. I found that probably the biggest challenge because I didn't expect that challenge to come up.
Ultimately they did kind of support us and they gave us funding.
We got quite a bit of funding.
Yes.
But the idea was that we would have gotten more if we were more closely associated with the department.
Yeah, that's because as postdoctors and postgraduates here, we're all in this sort of very precarious situation where we're kind of within academia, but then outside. In between, the sort of, we're on the threshold of what's happening.
And there were other challenges, and mostly pertaining to funding, really. So kind of ideas everyone was very happy about and, was encouraging us to go on. And this is, nobody explicitly says it, but women-only projects are very difficult to kind of, get funding for. Maybe kind of... a lot of the times in academia as well, I would say, but more so in an industry context. If we would go to industries and, talk about collaborations and partnerships, it's hilarious the number of times if you see kind of, for youngish women starting a project, they start looking at you as PAs and secretaries rather than, academic collaborators for themselves. So that was a roadblock that we had to kind of, maneuver before getting funding for it. The other part, of course, was the geography of the project. It is about Indian cinemas, but it is in London. So we very consciously wanted that, and we can talk a little bit more about why. But anyone from India would say, well, why are we going to fund a project in London? In kind of, here people would say, well, it's all about Indian cinema. So why exactly are you asking, say, kind of, very British industries to fund it? So that was a little bit of a problem as well. I mean, we are lucky that Inox India, so Inox Leisure, gave us a lot of funding. We convinced them that it is worth their while to fund a project in London, but that was tough. So I think the funding has been the hardest.
Yeah. So it's. I mean, besides this sort of glass ceiling that you get, and it must be sort of because you get this sort of dual angles of trying to make it work as a woman, and this is just hard for people somewhat might recognise that is a significant issue. But then there's also this sort of for Brits is a colonial sort of thing, but
or exotic. Not just colonial, but it's also sometimes still dismissed as exotic Shakespeare, or something that you're just using to sell Shakespeare with, instead of it being a a Shakespeare film or a Shakespeare industry in its own right.
So is it a bit like a marketing brand? It's like,
yeah.
That kind of brings it to the sort of discourse of freak shows, doesn't it? So it's you know, as horrible as it sounds, you know, it's that they're making Shakespeare just because with India because it's a new thing or something.
Yeah, and you know, often dismissed as Shakespeare with song and dance, as if it's something frivolous and not something that needs to be seriously engaged with, and that is one of the attitudes we really want to challenge.
So how did you then choose these films? Because you do, you know, because you do want to kind of have that sort of separation, not just so it's not just Bollywood, because this is, you know, is probably what the general public seems to think, that this is just Bollywood, whereas that's just one particular part of it. So how did you then go about choosing?
Well, the films being screened at the BFI are Bollywood. Vishal Bhardwaj is possibly the only Indian Shakespearean filmmaker who has made an impact across the world. And he's also the only filmmaker in India who's worked on a trilogy.
Right.
So there is another filmmaker called Jairaj who works in Malayali films, which is a South Indian film industry. Thea Buckley is a specialist in that industry. But he's on his third film right now, whereas Bhardwaj completed his trilogy last year. So I approached him about, you know, wanting to bring the project not only as a director. I wanted the entire team, so the writers. I wanted to understand the adaptation process. And the thing about Bhardwaj is he works within Bollywood. He is a Bollywood filmmaker, but if you watch his films, they're very not Bollywood. And it's very global. I mean, his influences are people like Kurosawa, and so it's world cinema.
So how does that come when you're watching those films? How does the for me who really hasn't seen much Bollywood or Indian cinema in general, what are those elements that you kind of consider to be this sort of a foreign influence or a different, you know, Kurosawa? Would you?
The kind of three films we've chosen, I mean, yes, Bhardwaj is the one who has done the trilogy, but they also show a fantastic range. I think it's also because he is working with different script writers with absolutely different kind of, you know, sensibilities and backgrounds. So the movies show a fantastic range. So I'll kind of give you an example of what we were talking about. So Maqbool, the one we're screening on 29th at the BFI. See you all there.
An adaptation of Macbeth.
Yes, an adaptation of Macbeth, which very much is like The Godfather meeting Macbeth. It's set in Mumbai, but in the Mumbai underworld. So you very much get glimpses of The Godfather, and obviously he has managed to do it so that you get glimpses of that, but it also is very much kind of, you know, close to the text, not in story but in language, and really uses Hindi and Urdu to kind of, you know, bring that adaptation across. With Omkara, I think you'd agree with me, is the most Bollywood of the three.
And the most popular worldwide. I think Omkara is the one film that a lot of people have watched. So
the adaptation of
Othello. And then again, talking about Heather, the adaptation of Hamlet, again, that has influences. It talks about a very particular Indian situation, which is 1990s Kashmir. And so kind of, you know, Indian history and politics is really important to that film. And in fact, he collaborated with Bashrat Bir, who also wrote Curfewed Nights, which is, he's a Kashmiri journalist, so that's an account of 1990s Kashmir. So on the one hand, it is so Indian, but in its kind of cinematography, you would absolutely see influences of Kurosawa or even Branagh with kind of, snow all the time. Yeah. So this is how he mixes both.
His team, his cinematography team, the people he's worked with across the 3 films, I forget the name of his cameraman. He was trained in Los Angeles. So there's the Hollywood angle there. I mean, in the way that, like in Omkara, for example, the green-eyed monster of jealousy. So Iago is shot through a green filter throughout. So those Hollywood tricks have been employed. The things that Bollywood cinema wasn't using as much before. It started now. Bollywood cinema is using a lot of technicians from Hollywood now. So it started, but Vishal Bhardwaj is probably one of the first few people who's started that whole having the same crew and, kind of using similar techniques, and he's developed, I mean, across the 3 films, you can actually see his development as a filmmaker as well. I mean, you can see that not only his development, but in the way Indians are reacting to Shakespeare. Now, you can see that through, because like when he took Maqbool to his financier in the beginning, his financier didn't want to produce it because it was like, it's on Shakespeare, it'll be too serious for Bollywood audiences.
That's true.
Right.
So, and now you've got Haider, which came out to Haider is probably the most un-Bollywood-like film, but it did quite well.
Yes.
So they're commercial successes as well.
That's right.
And there were people, I mean, Omkara has a few of the biggest stars in it, Bollywood stars in it.
Right.
It got a lot of funding as well. So.
So it's so that at the conference you have Bhardwaj talking as well as the screenwriters for all 3 films.
Yes.
Robin Bhatt.
Abbas Tyrewala, who's the writer for Maqbool, Robin Bhatt for Omkara, and Basharat Peer for Haider.
Well, you managed to put all this massive thing together with really big names. So what about this? I mean, what's about this project that you guys kind of are most excited about? Or I mean, you must be proud of just having this big 4-day event and happening in a couple of weeks.
Well, for me, it's like right from the beginning, I wanted collaboration. I wanted people talking to each other. So the very idea of getting filmmakers in the same room with academics, with practitioners. We've got Carol Jami coming there to read a script that she's working on, an adaptation called The Merry Wives of Munna. We've got people from Microwave India coming to talk about their upcoming film, The Hungry, which is on Titus. So, the idea of having a conversation, a full conversation between academics, practitioners, filmmakers, and getting them to see each other's perspectives, because there's sometimes quite a bit of disconnect. Unless people have those conversations. So for me, that's the most exciting thing that we've managed to kind of get everyone into the same room.
And from different...
perspectives and from different angles, and people who want to talk to each other.
Yeah, I'm just excited about the fact that, an entire project on Indian cinema and Shakespeare is happening in London, right in the middle of all of these 400 Shakespeare 400 celebrations. So for me, that was a big thing because, I said about how we were very conscious that we wanted this event to be happening in London. The reason for this was our belief that Indian cinema, Shakespeare in Indian cinema is a global subject. And so we wanted to put it right in the middle of all of these celebrations that were happening. So I'm kind of excited about the fact that, an entire project belonging to that is happening in London, and we have an international audience and international delegates.
Speakers coming from all over the world. So, it's very exciting.
It's the place to stake your claim on Shakespeare, isn't it? And this the year to do it.
Yes.
So, I mean, of course, this want to be a silly question, but I mean, if you were to say anyone would be listening to this podcast, or anyone in general, I mean, how would you sell, the conference and the screening? Why should they come?
Well, the first question, whenever I tell people that my PhD is on the influence of Shakespeare on Bollywood, first question people ask is there a connection? That's like the standard, and I mean the last 4 years that's the first, and I've become so inured to it that I have my answers ready now. So that's why you should come. I mean, people should come and see the connection between Indian cinema, not just Bollywood, but Indian cinema and Shakespeare, because it's a deeper connection, I feel, than any other colonized country, for instance. It's sometimes even a deeper connection than British people have with Shakespeare. Right. Because I know in India, I mean, I grew up to hearing Shakespeare dialogue slipped into everyday conversation. And we're used to that. It's not especially erudite to know Shakespeare in India. It's like that commonplace. Right. So.
I think people should come for celebrity spotting.
Oh yeah,
it has absolutely become a very starry conference, a very glamorous affair. We are very thankful for everyone who is coming. Vishal Bhardwaj, but all the 3 significant script writers, Abbas Tarwala, Robin Bhatt, Bashrat Bir. We also have Carol Jami, as you mentioned. We have Deborah Sarthe from British Council talking about the new kind of, Indian film. We have very kind of, significant academics. We have Poonam Trivedi from India. We have Diana Henderson from USA. We also have Mark Burnett, Bob White, Gil Harris, Madhvi Menon, and another kind of, fantastic range of speakers. So I think celebrity spotting is why people should come. But on a more serious note, I think they will enjoy it if they come and experience them. These films are amazing in their own right. And people should come because, Britain is a multicultural society. So Shakespeare is really shaping identity and politics and is a way to talk about these issues. And I think a multicultural society like Britain should engage with that.
Oh, excellent. Well, before we move on, just a reminder of everyone, if you still have time, go and check out www.indianshakespearesonscreen.com, where you can get tickets for the conference and for the screenings at the BFI. So go check that out. I'll put links everywhere I can and whatnot, so you can find them.
And they're selling out fast.
There must be, and there are limited spaces.